Welcome to Your Number Man, where we share financial strategies, business insights, and inspiring stories to help you navigate a successful business. I am your host, Johan Zanik, and my goal is to help you achieve a bigger life in business. Welcome to another episode of Your Number Man. Now, today we've got a special guest in our studio, Chris Goodway, CEO of Rent Roll Broker. Now, this is a little bit different. We talk a lot about numbers and entrepreneurship. Chris is an entrepreneur in the full sense of the word. He's also very involved in property. He's been in property for over 5 decades. My first job was in property. I was 19 years old, but that lasted 3 days. So that's the only thing I really know about property. So we've got Chris in the studio. He started as an agent in 1973, founded his own practice in 1978, and then sold his business in 1994 and went over to the Rent Roll Broker. Chris is the man of the moment. Welcome, Chris,
Thank you
to
very
our
much.
to our podcast.
It's great to be here.
Great.
Yeah.
You've got a remarkable career. What initially drew you to real estate back in the 70s?
Right, I left school and I was a clerk in the
Yes.
railways for a few years, and I went in the army.
Yes.
I came out, I didn't know what to do. I went back to clerical work and I was doing accounting and business studies at night school at the time. But I was really bored sitting in the office all day working. A friend of mine started doing real estate.
Yep.
And I sat back and looked at him and I thought, gee, he's doing very well and he's enjoying what he's doing. So I just followed the steps, got not an apprenticeship, but a traineeship within one of the big organisations, and it just went from there. And that friend that I admired at the time, we ended up going into business together in 1978, and we're still very good friends and do quite a lot of work together now.
That's great. So even today, you still
Yes,
mates?
yeah. So we've got a very good long-standing friendship.
Yes.
Started in year 7, I think it was, at school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And that's here in South Australia, in Adelaide.
That's right,
Yeah.
we're based in Adelaide. When
Yeah.
I started the Rent Roll Broker, I sold out of our real estate business in 2008. I finally sold out of the main part of our business. I was really disappointed in the way the transaction went. We didn't have anyone within the industry that was really focusing on selling real estate businesses or practices, or the main asset of a real estate business, which happens to be what we call a rent roll or a rent book.
I get it.
And so I guess because of that transaction not going as well as I thought it would, I sat back and I looked and I thought, I can design a business plan and do a business model that's going to be a lot more effective and a lot more comfortable for the clients. So that was 2008. The Rent Roll Broker was formed and it just developed slowly from there.
Okay. So rent roll, how I understand it, is a roll of all your rentals.
Yes.
Okay.
What happens is real estate agents, they're involved in 2 key areas. One is selling real estate and the other is managing real estate on behalf of landlords.
Okay.
So what you'll have is, as a landlord, you'll go out and you'll buy an investment property. Then you've got to think, oh, well, I need a tenant.
Yes.
So rather than doing it yourself, you go to a real estate agent. Most real estate agents got access to tenancy databases. They're obviously trained and qualified to be able to understand the Residential Tenancy Act, which is very, very involved.
Okay.
And so most property investors, if they're not sure on doing it themselves or not confident in doing it themselves, will give it to an agent to manage.
Yes.
And so as the agent manages those properties, he brings on the qualified staff. And a good agency needs to have at least 100, 150 properties under management to make it a worthwhile part of their business.
Okay.
But we're now seeing clients that I'm dealing with anything up to and over 1,000 properties under management on behalf of individual landlords.
Yes.
So you might have a landlord with 1 property, you might have a landlord with 10 properties. Sometimes you get them bigger than that, but most of them probably between 1 and 10 properties. And they've given the agent a responsibility of selecting the tenants, doing the inspections, looking after maintenance repairs, and doing rent reviews, leases, bonds, all of that sort of thing is done by the agent.
Okay. And then the broker is, you got his rent rolls and you are like
Yeah,
an agent.
well,
You're basically
yeah.
selling other people's roles
That's
for the
right.
best bidder,
Yeah,
for that matter.
Yeah. It then becomes what we call a cash flow business.
Yes.
And we'll talk about it a little bit later on, but obviously
Sure.
real estate agents are very dependent on commission.
Okay.
So if they sell a house, they get a commission. But if they don't sell a house, they don't get a commission. So if you get a very poor market, or the market turns around and there's not many sales, then the agency doesn't have a lot of income. Very vulnerable. Whereas with property management, managing properties for landlords, they get a percentage of the rental income, usually 7 or 8%. And so that income is there every month, month after month after month. And again, if you've only got a handful of properties, it's not a very lucrative part of the business. But once you start getting into the hundreds and hundreds or thousands of properties, then it becomes a lucrative financial cash flow form of the business. It builds a really good foundation for the sales aspect of the business.
I get, okay. So it's all about scaling that business then.
That's correct.
It will accumulate and expansionate in terms of the profit, which we're going to talk about later as well. Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. So in your opinion, is it more advantage to buy an existing rent roll or build your own from scratch?
Well, we like to think of it as a balancing act. You need to be doing both.
Yeah.
Particularly when an agency starts, they usually don't have a lot of capital. So in that case, an agent will probably start and get the first 100-odd properties just through what we call organic growth. So they're out there, they're marketing, they're talking to clients, and those clients are giving them their properties to look after. And so they get this starting point, might be the first 12 months, 18 months, where they're building and trying to build up to maybe 100 properties, so that at 100 properties, they can then probably afford to bring on a property manager, which is a qualified person to manage those properties on their behalf, because most principals are still selling. So they can only do so much. Some of them will do both, but you're limited on how much you can actually physically do. So you need to have staff that are qualified, that are really focused on managing those properties. So that's the first goal. Once you get to about 150 properties, then you're in a position where banks will look at saying, okay, if you've got 150 properties, we'll lend you enough money to buy another 150. So about 50% of 300. So we can then go out and find them a portfolio, 150 properties, and they double the value of their business and they double their turnover. And that gets them to stage one. And they spend a couple of years bedding it in, getting to know the clients, making sure the clients are looked after properly and building that rapport with them as well.
And everybody wins.
That's correct.
I mean, the bank gets their money back. They get a bigger rent roll. And you win as an agent. You take a commission or you sell it for a fee as well.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's great. And what is the most important aspects to consider when preparing for this transaction then?
Yeah. Well, as I said, a successful agency needs to have a well-managed portfolio as its foundation. And that's really because, as I said, sales can be very spasmodic.
Yes.
At the moment, agents are doing very, very well. They have a very lucrative sales market. But when I first started back in the 70s, there was a period of time in the late 1970s which we couldn't get finance. The banks would not lend the money. And so it didn't matter how many houses you had for sale. To try and make money was very, very difficult as an agent because you just couldn't get the funding or the clients couldn't get the funding. I was fortunate. I was with a fairly large organisation and we had access to what we call bridging finance or temporary finance. And so we were able to bridge loans for clients during that very difficult period for a year, 18 months, till the market turned around and the money started to free up again, and then they could go to the bank, refinance and pay out their bridging finance or interest-only loans and just take a traditional mortgage. So there's been times I've been involved. These when we had several quite large builders go broke in the state.
Yeah.
The market was flooded with repossessed homes and the market dropped 30%.
Yeah, well, that was during the time of the stock exchange crash back in New York. You know.
Yeah.
When was it? Yeah, 80. It was 83 or 84?
Around about then, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And we had builders. I'd actually sold one of the largest subdivisions in the northern suburbs. It was about 300-odd blocks of land to a builder. They settled on half of it and then went broke. And that actually ended up sending out the company I was working for, that actually ended up sending them broke eventually anyway.
Wow.
It was just a terrible time. But the market just collapsed on itself. When the agencies can't rely on sales income, property management really comes to the fore. So we consider that a solid agency, a solid real estate agency, needs to have a good, functioning, profitable property management division running behind the scenes or alongside of everything else.
Okay, yeah, and it goes hand on hand.
It does.
Your agents are doing okay, but it hasn't always been like that. I mean, if you can't afford houses, like you said, then everybody will decide to go and rent.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I liked about coming into real estate was it's very much like the food industry. Everybody needs to eat, but everybody also needs to have somewhere to live. Whether it's renting, whether it's buying, they need accommodation.
Yeah, you do.
So to me, it's a priority of life. And to me, that gave me the incentive to come into real estate.
Yeah. You also talk a lot about the importance of having a balanced agency. So is that what you mean?
Well, to me, a balanced agency is an agency that has enough money coming in from property management to cover all the fixed costs of the operation. So if they went into a sales market where the sales market just completely dried up, they could rationalise their staffing and they could still function as a business through the income that they're produced from the property management division of their business. So it's giving them that safety net, as it were, underneath their business.
Yeah.
If they don't have that, then they have to close their doors. I know real estate agents who are doing exceptionally well in the good times. In the bad times, they've sold their business, they're driving buses, they're driving taxis just to make a living. There's only so much cake in the market in property management. It's a lot better because once you've got this client, you've got the client. I mean, we used to have clients that were with us for over 20 years and we'd look after those clients and we'd manage their properties and they were with us. They were good, faithful clients and we had them for many, many years. And so we could rely on that business and that cash flow that was producing to keep us going. So, a balanced agency, in my books, has to have a good property management division.
Okay, I understand that. I'm curious, when was the biggest spikes that you saw in property? Because I remember I immigrated in 2007 to Australia. People said if I came 2 years earlier, I would have probably been able to still get a bargain.
Yeah, well, I bought my first house in 1973. That was $11,500 for a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs.
Yeah.
And 4 years later, I sold it for $27,000, and that gave me the money to buy a nice big block of land with views and borrowed the money and built a house on it. So there was a good spike in the 70s. We had the drop back in the 80s. It jumped quite a bit before it actually fell backwards 30%.
That was in the mid-80s.
That was in the mid-80s. But also, by the time we got to the late 90s, there was a bit of a spike in the late 90s, and then it plateaued. And for nearly 10 years, from probably in 97, 98, we were buying properties and investments. And we were spending, for the bottom end of the market, we were probably spending about $24,000, $25,000, up to about $30,000, $35,000 for a house. And we were buying the bottom end of the market because we could buy a property for $24,000 to $30,000 by the time we cleaned it up and everything. We'd put a tenant in there, we'd get $100 a week rent. So that's about $5,000 a year rent on a $30,000 investment. So it wasn't a bad return. And we bought them for the return, thinking that, okay, these properties, they're only very cheap properties. They're out in the suburbs. They're not going to go up in value. And they didn't move probably for 10 years. So we were sitting there, and I would say to investors and clients we would get, buy the property, make sure it's got a good return, and make sure you're gearing it so that it pays for itself. And then you can just keep buying over and over again. And you could buy 10, 15, 20 properties, have them all basically paying for themselves in those days. And that was really the key. We weren't focusing at all on capital growth. But then all of a sudden, just before the GFC hit, the prices started to go up. But then the GFC hit and everything plateaued out again. And then after the GFC, of course, from there we've seen what's happened to the market.
Yeah.
And so properties that we've been holding since 1997, 98, which cost us $24,000, $25,000.
Yes.
Now they're worth $350,000, $400,000.
Yeah, but you're seeing a little bit of a difference now because there is a problem with not enough housing, isn't it, currently?
Yeah, real estate's always been about supply and demand. Most of the market trends have been affected by the supply and demand of stock.
I get
It's
it.
the same with everything. So we found that quite a way through. We've got a property at the moment, probably worth $350,000, and we got $50 a week rent. Got another one that's worth about $580, so we're getting about $535 on that.
Yeah. Now, I've heard that you used to teach people how to reach 1,000 property in 10 years. That is your business model that you currently have.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a business model we built on and we've sort of worked on it to build our business. I was in New Zealand in 1991 and I met a guy who had a real estate business which was predominantly property management. He only did a very small percentage of sales. Most of his sales came out of the property management. And he had 3,000 properties under management. In little old Adelaide, most of the agents had 150, 200 at that time. So that really influenced me. I had a look at his business. He was very good. He showed me what they were doing, and I spent a week with him actually, looking at his business and how it operated. And I came back all fired up thinking, this is what Adelaide needs. It needs a good modern-day business that focuses purely on managing properties. And so I spoke to my business partners. They took the sales division of our business. I took the property management division of the business and rebranded it so we could be exclusively property management. And that was in the early 90s, and we were one of the first agents in Adelaide to focus purely on property management. And we centralised ourselves in the city as well as having suburban agencies, and we developed our business through there. And this is the model I used. We already had a considerable number of properties under management, so we already had a head start. But as I said in the beginning, an agent needs to probably build a bit of a foundation for himself, so he needs about 100, 150 properties before the banks will consider lending on them. Once they get to that level, they've got no borrowings on that. The income from that will give them the opportunity to go to bank and get enough money to borrow another 150. So my model works for
Get enough money
50-50.
You mean borrow enough money to go and buy another 150, is it?
That's right. So you have a 50% value.
So by starting off on 100, you can increase it pretty easily to 300. That's first 100 probably is the most difficult part.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, because the banks look at the economy of scales.
Yep.
And at 150 properties, you really break even. So they look at that as a level. And then they say, okay, once you get to 150 properties, and that the banks will say, oh, look, we'll lend 60 to 70%, but that's of their valuation, and their valuations are always conservative. So we work on 50%. And that way we know we're not going to overcommit our buyers as well. So 150 properties, you buy another 150, that's 300.
Yep.
You work with building the rapport and the relationship with those landlords because property management is very long-term relational. So you have to build your relationship with those clients, give them really good service, look after them, and focus on doing that for the next 2 years. So you've now got 300 properties, 2 years in front of you, work on building the relationship, but also work on building organic growth as well. So marketing, going out. What we used to do is we used to buy some land, build some units, sell those units through investment seminars to investors. So we'd get the sale. They would then come back onto our rent roll and we would then manage them for those investors. And eventually, if they ever did want to sell, hopefully they'd come back to us as well. So we did a lot of projects.
But you're not a developer as such.
We were a developer on the side.
Okay, all right.
A pseudo-developer.
Yeah, okay. So you would go to the big developing company, bit of a joint venture with...
We had a builder friend who had quite a large building company and we helped him start. And so he looked after us and we did quite a few JVs together and we would build units, apartments and stuff like that. So that enabled us to build that way. But a lot of agents just have to go out and really focus on the investment market. And a lot of times investors are buying. So if they have an open inspection, they sell a property to an investor, the first question has to be, can we look after your property for you? Can we manage it for you? And so on, and get them on board that way. So 300 properties, we want them after that 2 years, probably end up with about 350 to 400. And also put all the profit they're making out of those 300, 400 properties back into paying down the mortgage they took.
Okay.
So the idea is they've got to build equity and reduce their borrowings as quick as they can. So at the end of that 2 years, they should then be in the same position where they can then come back and borrow on the existing value of what they've got, go from 400 properties to 800 properties.
And that would be 800 then in
management.
That's right. So your first 2 years, you'll try and get your 100 properties.
Yeah.
Basically. Then you go to the bank, another 2 years, you got, let's say, 300 properties. Okay, and in another 2 years, you would have 800 properties.
That's right. As soon as you can get to around about 400
Yeah.
and you've paid as much down as you can of that mortgage, and you've got to be really diligent to do that, but you can do it, then that gives you the equity to then go and buy 400 more properties. So that takes you to your 800. And effectively you do the same thing again. Spend a couple of years, make sure that everything's bedded in properly and so on. And then you only need enough equity to buy another 200 or 300 and you're over your 1,000 properties.
So you got your 1,000 in less than 10 years.
Yeah, we suggest 10 years is a good
10 years is
good model to do it.
I think I'm going to do it.
Well, we had one client we worked with and he's done some great testimonial videos for us. And he started off basically doing this model.
Yeah.
He didn't quite get to 1,000. I think he had nearly 800.
Yeah.
But I mean, his business in that time was worth just under $2 million. So we sold his business for just under $2 million.
Yeah.
So that was his retirement, along with a few other bits and pieces he'd done along the way. There's some very good programs run through the Real Estate Institute where you can qualify as a licensed agent or property manager, or if you just want to become an investor.
Yeah.
I think the key is really having a business plan for yourself. We used to buy and sell a lot of properties, but our Italian clients would always buy but never sell.
Okay.
And one of the things I learned early in the piece was the Italians would say, Chris, we always buy, we never sell. I always thought about that. And so although I had a lot of friends with buying and selling, we would buy and keep. And for years, we didn't really see a lot of value. Markets went up a little bit, but the rents went up. They paid for themselves, so we just left them. And now, 20, 30 years later, we're sort of very comfortable because of that advice that we got from those market gardeners many, many years ago.
Yeah, and it's not too late. I mean, obviously
no.
you started at a great time in the 70s or 80s when it was easy to pick up. Well, not that easy, really. It was probably cheaper. But is it too late for people
I'm
to get
still saying to people now, you have to spend a lot of money, but if you buy something today at today's price, I'm pretty much guaranteed that in 10 or 15 years' time, it'll be worth twice as much as what it is today.
Okay.
So you spend $1 million today, 10 to 15 years' time, I'm pretty much guarantee it'll be worth $2 million. So, if you can save that in that period of time, you're doing very well.
That's right.
My ideal situation is I would only buy property if I could buy it, tidy it up, put the tenants in and have it pay for itself. I might have to pay the rates and taxes, but as far as the mortgage was concerned, the rent had to cover the mortgage.
Okay.
And so that way I wasn't limited by the number of properties I could go and buy because each one was basically paying for itself.
So you need the cash.
Yes. I'm not a big fan of negative gearing.
No?
Negative gearing is all right for people on very, very high incomes because they can distribute some of their tax. And you need to have a cash reserve because things will go wrong. There will be a time when you do get some extra bills come in or something happens and you may need maintenance and repairs done on the building. So it's like every good business, you need to have something in reserve. But it's all about planning. It's all about developing a business plan and making sure you're diligent and stick to it.
That's great. I'm a big fan of business planning and budgets as well. So let's talk a bit of numbers because technically it's a numbers show and I handle all kind of business, usually small to medium-sized business owners that really want to put in the hard work and they got a passion, they want to see the business succeed and they are interested to make a profit. But what ratios are we talking about here?
One of the reasons I absolutely love property management and have been involved in it for all these years, it is one of those businesses and one of the few businesses that really does work towards economy of scale. So, as you said, 100, 150 properties. If you're doing all the work yourself, you can make a living out of it. But you need 150 to 200 before you can really employ someone. A good property manager in current market could be anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 a year. And senior property managers in larger organisations are earning up to $100,000 a year. So you need to have a decent business. Our business modelling shows that around 200 odd properties, you may make a marginal profit of 10, 12%. Once you get up to 400 to 500 properties, you're then starting to look at maybe getting closer to 20%, probably in the high teens.
Okay.
And I'm talking net profit. 500 to 800, you should be in the mid-20s. And once you get into our business model of 1,000 plus, then you can actually start looking at net profits of anything up to around 30%.
Okay.
I've actually
Now
seen
we're
them better than that. Now we're talking serious money.
Now we're talking
Yeah.
the big bucks, yes.
Yeah. So 1,000 properties
Yeah.
could be bringing in, say, $1,700 per property per year. That's
Net profit.
$1.7 million income per year.
Okay. Yeah.
And so out of that, you can have a senior manager, you can have all your administration being done separately, and you can have property managers looking after portfolios of about 150 properties each. The other good thing is a lot of agents miss the point that when you get that, rent rolls lose a certain percentage each year. Currently, a lot of the agents have been losing over 20% of their portfolio because a lot of investors have been selling. The market's been very lucrative on the sales side, so they've been cashing in, and also legislation's been tightening, and it's getting a little bit harder, particularly for the private landlords, and so a lot of landlords have left the industry, put their money somewhere else. But for those that are left behind, it's good because the rents have been going up accordingly. But what a lot of the agents really don't seem to think is if they've got a rent roll of 200, say they lost 10% a year to sales, that's 20 sales a year they might get out of their rent roll. But if they got 1,000 properties, that's 200. Now, your average selling commission is probably $10,000. So you do the maths on that, and you suddenly think, because I've got that portfolio sitting there, if I have 200 properties out of 1,000 go to sales in a year, in a really bad year, that still gives me quite a significant income and cash flow from sales. The secret, of course, is you have to replace that plus to get capital growth.
Yeah.
So once an agency gets to around about 600 to 700 properties or more, we suggest they employ what we call a business development manager.
Okay.
And that business development manager is there to grow the business, and they get remunerated on building the business. So they're out working with the investors, working with the project developers, getting their projects, doing the investment seminars, selling the properties to investment sellers. And this is where you need to get integration between your sales department and your property management department. They've got to understand investments. We used to build a group of 6 units or 10 units, and then we would run investment seminars, and we'd be able to do a presentation. We'd have our accountant come along and he'd give them some tax advice. And so we would sell those properties to the investors. The investors would buy them, we'd manage them, and we'd help them building their portfolio. So we're helping them create wealth.
That's an amazing business model. I love it.
Yeah,
It's great, and it's definitely something to consider. What advice would you give to someone just starting out in the real estate industry today?
That's a really good question. I think, first of all, go and work for a large agency. An agency is prepared to invest in staff training and mentorship, so you're going to get some development. Be mindful of the fact that owning your own business isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all. I know quite a lot of very successful people who are quite happy and comfortable working for a large organisation. They're earning good money. They don't have to worry about running a business and all the headaches that go with running a business. And the money they earn, they can then put back into the investment industry. So they're buying and selling property all the time. They're building their rental portfolio, and they can do that while earning good money working for a large organisation. So if you're coming into the industry, you don't necessarily have to become a real estate agent. Sadly, a lot of the real estate agents that never really go anywhere, they come in as a good salesman. Because they're a good salesperson, they think, I need to have my own business so I can get 100% of the commission. They don't have any business acumen. They don't have accounting or financial skills. And they go out and they wallow around in this industry for decades. And I've had agents that have had a business after 20 or 30 years, they've got a business that's only worth a few $100,000 when they could have had a business worth millions. But they just haven't had the ability to get above a certain level. So owning your own business isn't the be-all and end-all.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing that I might say is that although you can make a good income out of real estate, selling them, and even property managers, I said, a good property manager can earn good money.
Yes.
It's disciplining yourself to put some of that money into a long-term investment. And for me, that long-term investment's got to be real estate. So you don't go out and buy a flash car. When you start off in a business, you start earning good money. A lot of them go out and they buy their Mercedes or their BMW. Leave that for later.
They use it as part of their branding, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but you can get a second-hand one for half the price. And that's what we used to do.
Yeah.
So put the money into an investment. I mean, if you're really keen on stocks and shares, that's fine. But my passion has been property. So you put the money into property and you grow your wealth through that. You won't create wealth because once you, as a salesperson, or once you have a business, once you sell that business or once you stop selling, you have no income. So you have to be able to create wealth as you're going along. My sort of philosophy is if you're in a position where you can borrow and buy anything in real estate, I look for the old adage that it's the worst property in the best street. If you're in a position where you can renovate or tidy up the property, get the worst house in the best street, because the suburb is what determines where your value, your capital growth is going to be.
Yes.
If you're really starting out from square one, you don't have a lot of money, then return on investment is going to be more important than capital growth. So that way you need to probably go out to the suburbs a bit more. But either way, do it. Just go out and do it.
Yeah. So takeaway for today.
Just go out and do it. Yeah.
Just go out and do it. Do a bit of research. Speak to Chris. His detail is available on my channel. He's got an extremely well-oiled model that he can walk you through. Well, Chris, thanks for coming in, mate.
That's right.
It's really nice having you. I've never really gone into property and really start researching it a bit. It's a really interesting topic. Thanks for sharing your insights today.
That's all right.
It's been a pleasure.
No, my pleasure indeed. All the best.
Thank you. All right, people.
Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap for the show. And until next time. Well, thanks for listening to the show. I really hope you got some great takeaways from it. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to the show. It would be great if you can share it. You can also look me up on socials. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. And you can also get in touch with me on my website, which is www.yournumberman.com.au. And you can get in touch with me as well. I'll definitely get back to you. See you next time. Cheers.